So we have about an hour together. I'm going to spend about 45 minutes talking, and I hope there'll be some useful stuff in there. And then we'll have maybe 15 minutes or so of Q&A. If I ever get distracted for a moment, it's because I'm admitting more people, just so you know. In terms of how I do things, I like learning and training to be as fun as it is useful. So I hope this will engage you effectively in that way. I think looking at communication, I think there are two main areas that I'm really interested in. That is basically the content, the words, the stuff you're saying, the material, and how you deliver it. The dark art of delivering with confidence. And just as an extra note, although Shell mentioned it, I just want to make sure that everyone's got it. I will not be showing slides. There will be no useful information presented on the screen. So you will need to take notes, which I find is probably the best way to do things. Now, when it comes to, I think, communication of all sorts, I think the very best communication has a story at its heart. And so with that in mind, I'm going to give you my full introduction, even though Shell's done a great job. I'm going to tell you a little bit more by telling you my story. So at school, I think I'll start at school. At school, I did pretty badly academically. I liked art and I liked writing stories. Art was going to be my thing. And that is the best sneeze I've heard for quite some time. That was a Darth Vader level sneeze. It was like, I imagine if you sneeze while wearing a scuba, that's what it sounds like. That was very good. So well done. Whoever did that was amazing. Art was going to be my thing. That was the hope for me, that I would be good at art. You know, I would find a career in art, because I think most of the teachers thought I was stupid or lazy or both. And so I did an art foundation course, graphic design course, got very interested in video editing. So even though I left with a college with a graphic design qualification, I thought that I would be a video editor. Quite soon after I'd left the course, a friend of mine, after I'd finished it, a friend of mine who'd been on the course said, hey, I've started working at a video games company. Why don't you come and work with me? So I went there, got a job there, and became a level designer. So I was designing video games, which wasn't the avenue I was going for. And almost immediately after starting there, I decided that I would also do stand-up comedy in the evenings at the weekends. And I soon discovered, although I was rubbish at it to begin with, as most stand-ups are, I soon discovered it was highly addictive. Something about it which I really loved. And so I did, like a sort of introverted superhero. By day, I was designing video games levels, and by night, I was trying to make people laugh for the attention and sometimes for money. And I did those two things side by side for about 10 years. Then I thought, right, I want to see if I can go full-time at stand-up. Can I become a stand-up comedy star? You already know the answer to this. So I moved in with my girlfriend, and she supported me while I did it full-time. So as a full-time stand-up, I definitely became, I definitely improved, which was great. But after a couple of years, my partner said to me, right, what's the plan with the whole stand-up thing? And of course I said, there was no plan. So I gave up on that, and I was slightly down about it, but I thought at least I know that's what happens if I go at it full time. And I went back to video games. So I got a job at Sony Cambridge, which has since closed. And so my partner and I moved up to Ely, which is where we live now. We started a family and got married. Great. And then after a few years at Sony PlayStation, designing PSP games and PlayStation 3 games, there was a 15th anniversary of the Sony PlayStation. And there was a big do at the O2 in London. And there was a big party. But before the party, we sat and listened to some talks from senior figures at Sony. I'm going to ask you a direct question now. You don't have to come back at me if you don't want to, but see if you can guess what those talks were like. Most people seem to guess pretty much straight away the style and quality of those talks. I'm going to preempt any response here. They were pretty dreadful. So they'd clearly spent a lot of time and money on this. A beautiful, great venue, amazing slides, and they'd rehearsed it into the ground. The words were all coming out very robotically. It was very wooden. And so I just had this little ping moment where I thought, this speaker, and I thought about each of them, but the first one in particular was very senior. They need everything that I learned from stand-up. They need all that stuff. They need to write something that's concise as a story, and they need to sell it. They need to have some personality. So a year or so after that, I left and set up on my own. And now this is what I do. This was 8 years ago. And now I coach people one-to-one and in groups, and I help them get past that barrier of the fear of public speaking. Now what I'm doing tends to be have the added aspect of communicating online, which is what we're doing here. And this is part of the reason for not having slides, because last year I'd got really obsessed with PowerPoint, and I thought, great, I'll make science fiction PowerPoint. And I made these beautiful slides. I spent ages on them. They looked incredible. But I realized, particularly if it's a Zoom call, I was relegated to a postage stamp in the corner, and that's breaking the connection. So even though the information was clear, I find that this is much better. And if you've got me on speaker view, then I'm filling your screen, sorry, but that's the best way I find to engage, to kind of use this rectangle and get out there. If it's in person, then obviously I can walk around and move about and poke you if you're not listening and that kind of thing. And here is obviously it's very different. Anyway, so that's my story. I hope that was that was informative. Let's talk about then the very first moment you realize that you've got to give a talk, whether you've decided you're going to do it or you've been told you have to do it. What's that first stage, other than can I get out of it? Assuming that you are an expert in your subject, what's the first thing that you should do? This is a direct question, and I'll be interested to see if anybody comes back at me. What's the first thing you should do?
Understand your audience.
Oh, amazing. It's like you knew that's the thing I like to ask people at the beginning. Yes, I think it can be tempting to think, well, I'm going to give my talk on the subject that I'm an expert on, and you deliver the talk, but it might not be what that audience necessarily needs. So I think it's understanding who are you talking to, what are they about, how many of them they're going to be, what's their level of experience, does anyone know more about the subject than you, what's their culture, nationally, industry-wise, the company, what's the level of interaction going to be, what do they need to know, but also what's that problem that you're going to be solving. So I think I understand the problem that I'm solving for you all today. If I ask all of you, I imagine we get very different responses. If it's, say, 4 people or less, I will look people up on LinkedIn. I'll look at their social media and I'll find out. It's not stalking, right? This is all published. People put stuff on LinkedIn going back decades, right? And I find it fascinating when you see, oh, this person, right? So right now they are, I don't know, an accountant, but they studied dance. Like there was a change here, or they're working for this eco energy company, but they were financial consultants. I don't know. I'm freestyling. But the point is, there's stuff there. There are these great connections. So I looked up someone just today, and it said, which was at university, she was part of the breakdancing club. So I thought, great, I'm going to drop that in, right? And see what happens. So I think that can be really useful. On a even further sort of Jason Bourne level, when I've done training in person with, say, maybe 6 people, I have done a sheet and like a cheat sheet with people's profile picture. And sometimes people don't look like their profile picture, but I've got the profile picture and the name, and I've tried to memorize those so that when I first meet them, I can say hi and use their name. And I think it just gives a better connection. But also, if you were in a real pressure situation, let's say you were going for an interview, or I think it's always good to know what the CEO looks like of a particular company. So if you bump into them, you can use their name and not insult them, that kind of thing. So I think finding out about the audience is really good. But I think thinking of it a bit like a spy, what's everything that you could possibly know? Even if your subject is something that you're an expert in, what's the most recent thinking about that? Has there been something more recent that's come up? Has someone discredited a piece of information that you'd like to talk about? So I think doing the research is really important. Who you're going to be talking to, why you're talking to them, what the problem is you're going to be solving. And even if you ask them directly, or it's become obvious to them that you've asked the person who arranged it, what's the thing that they want to have solved, that at least shows you put in the work. And I think that can be really useful. So then, right, how to write some great material. I'm going to give you 2 techniques, which I'm really proud of. I think I've invented them. It's unlikely, but let's go with it. The 2 things are linked. The first is saying the words out loud and capturing them, what I call speak to write. Now, capturing your spoken words can be tricky. I've just recently discovered a function that's been there for a long time, which is the dictate function in Word, which I have to say is fantastic. And my daughter, who's 9, by the way, was doing some homework recently. She went, look, Daddy, I found Google Narrate or whatever it is. And she's literally writing the stuff said I was bored of typing. Anyway, capturing those words could be recording. It could be an audio recording, a video recording. I appreciate watching yourself back and hearing your own voice back can be deeply unpleasant, but it can be very useful. Saying the words out loud. What do you suppose are the benefits? And I think there are several. What are the benefits of saying the words out loud rather than writing your words or typing away? Go. Not all at once, obviously.
You get fluency.
Oh, fantastic. Yes. You get a flow. If you've written it perfect, by the way, it's a perfect answer. What I find is people often don't say the words out loud at all until the day itself. And then of course on the day itself, it's a mess, right? It sort of falls out. You can write a piece that reads well, right? It would make a great speech. It's a wonderful article, but it's not necessarily the way you speak. So absolutely, you get this wonderful fluency. I find other benefits. I'm going to go through all the things I can think of. The fact that it's conversational and in your vernacular and in your style lends you that fluency. Also, in fact, it's all linked to fluency. The between each section, those different little links and segues. If you've got used to saying it, you're going to have a nice natural link to it, even if it's fairly sort of vague and tenuous as a link. It's still there as part of the flow. I've seen people give talks, particularly online, where they've had 2 monitors and they've been reading the stuff off a slide and it's been going okay, but then they say the title of the next section. So they'll say methodology and they talk about it. And I realized that's logical, but that's not how we talk, right? You go, oh, right, yeah, next I want to talk about methodology. So I'm so easily distracted. That's what you need to know about me. It's borderline ADHD. Anything, any little noises. I've lost my train of thought. It was going so well. It's writing. So you say the words out loud. If you've done that, also you can find out very basic things like how long it takes to deliver. The talk that overruns for me is a little bit of a crime. If you've got a half-hour slot and you decide to just write a piece and then on the day you overrun by 5 minutes, I think that's very bad form. It doesn't help you look very professional and it will annoy subsequent speakers and so on. If, however, you run through it and you find out in your half-hour slot you've got a piece and it takes, say, 12 minutes, I would say that's a good thing to know that it's going to be a little bit shorter and you can tell people in advance. But saying the words out loud is a great way of embedding the material, getting used to the flow. And it just means on the day, you can really tell the difference between people who have got used to saying the words and those who have created a script and they're just saying them out loud. Can you all hear that as well? Someone's got their TV on. Excellent. So the second part of that technique is what I call sketch method. So something you should know about me is I like stationery, right? Even though I've sort of gone mostly digital, these are index cards and I get a lot of pleasure from simply unwrapping a packet of these. Here's the technique. You take index cards like this or Post-its or pieces of paper, it doesn't matter, as long as they're separate, and you write down on each one the sections for your talk, the headings. And you may only have, say, 3 for quite a long talk. By having them on pieces of paper, you can move them around. The spider diagram, the mind map, is great for getting the ideas down, but you can't then move them around. It doesn't really give you any flow or sequence. By having them on separate bits of paper, you can experiment. So you can do a quick run through and see, right, actually this works, but this really cool bit that I've got at the end, maybe I should open with that interesting story. Maybe that should be the thing that I hit people with, that amazing statistic or fact, open up with it. By experimenting with it, you can see what's the best flow, how long does it take, and you edit and write and speak all combined. It means you can get to a first draft, quick rough draft in 10 minutes, rather than opening up PowerPoint, creating your first slide, spending ages on it, and then duplicating that. With that technique, I find you run the risk of then having to throw away something because you've realized it doesn't fit with the flow. Whereas with the sketch method, you're looking at it at a very high level early on. You can easily throw something away because you're not attached to it, because you haven't. That is Wow. Can everyone else see that message there in the chat? That's good. Okay. So you experiment with those different sequences until you've got something that feels right, that you feel's got a flow, it works, and then you can invest time in each of those sections and populate them with a bit more material. The other thing which you can do with that is, I mentioned you can get a sense of the timing. You find that actually you've got 35 minutes of material or an hour of material where you only needed 10 or vice versa. You can get an idea of how long each of those sections are. So I mentioned overrunning being a crime, in my opinion. Let's say you've got, I don't know, 5 cards like this, or 5 pieces of paper. You may find you're noting down cues on one sheet of paper. As you run through, as you do each of your rehearsals, you should find you get to a fairly consistent running time. So what you can do is you can, using a stopwatch function on your phone, I find works really well, is mark down the timings for each of the sections. So you can see, section 3 starts at roughly 8.5 minutes, for example. I need to be at 17 minutes for the final section. If you use that technique, and this is the kind of a stand-up comedy technique, you can bring your talk in on time, or the time you predicted, within 30 seconds or a minute, which, as you can imagine, is great for everyone. And it's a lovely thing to be able to say, this is going to take just under 20 minutes, and then you deliver it just under 20 minutes. And what you do is you use your stopwatch function as you're going along, and you check and you see, okay, because let's face it, the passing of time becomes massively distorted when you speak. It's not unusual for me to get someone to speak for, and they'll give a talk and they'll do it for 10 minutes. And I'll say, how long do you think it was? They go, 3.5. Like, it's easy to be way off. Or the other way around, of course. I've done it where I've been giving a talk and I go, this is great, right? It should be near the end, of a 45-minute talk, and I'm at 17. I think, right, gone a little bit quickly. So it allows you to steer the ship. It's like splits in running. You can see, okay, so I'm a minute ahead or I'm a minute behind. I'll just adjust accordingly, rather than getting to the end and think, right, I've got my 10 minutes, my killer ending, and they go, that's it, we're done, because you didn't rehearse the thing. So speak to write, sketch method. Clearly I've invented those. Now, with that in mind, with the idea of cues, I'm not a fan of having a whole script written out. I think maybe as a first pass, it could be quite useful to dump all the ideas down and have a sort of opening version that is a full script. As soon as you can, you want to get to cues, right? Just single words or phrases that let you speak for a minute or so. It may be tempting. Well, it'd be very tempting to have a script, because you think, well, I want to get this right. I want to say all the right words. But I don't think I've ever seen anyone read from a script without it really severely affecting their delivery. I think you should aim for conversational, natural, relaxed, friendly, even if it's what you might call a very informal talk, a very formal talk. I don't think it should be from a script. The downside, I guess, if you do very conversational and you're going from cues, you might finish and think, I missed out that cool thing. I had that really cool phrase in the third section. The audience didn't know you were going to say it. It doesn't matter. For me, it's far outweighed by looking natural. And if you do it well, and you've really got used to saying the words, and you can reword the thing each time to keep it fresh for you so it doesn't come out wooden, you may even get that feedback where someone goes, wow, that's amazing. Did you rehearse that? They might even think that you'd improvised the whole thing because you got used to just saying it, just saying the words out loud. Now, I'm a big fan of simplicity, and I think simplicity should rule over all communication. So the meeting, the picture presentation, the talk, the email, condensing it down. So there's a quote which is, I think, generally attributed to Mark Twain, which is, I would have written you a shorter letter, but I didn't have time, which I really like. That editing process is really important. You could spend ages on a brilliantly crafted email. Once it's over a certain length, people just aren't going to read it. They might scan it, they might look at the first sentence, or they won't even bother. That's just how it is. Whereas replacing that with a phone call or a much shorter email would be a much better idea. No one ever said, I wish that presentation had gone on for twice as long, right? If you've got that short slot and, everyone's expecting a 40-minute presentation, it's what everyone does. It's what we do. They have slides, and you say, well, I'm going to have no slides. And it's going to take about 12 minutes. if you're getting the idea into people's heads, if you're achieving the objective and persuading them, you're a hero, right? Don't feel, oh, I must pad this. I've got to include extra stuff, because your audience will see through that in a second. You always assume your audience is intelligent. It's not going to work. So I think conciseness is wonderful. And that's part of the reason I like the conversational style. If I ever work with people who are not native English speakers, their first thing they say is, oh, I'm worried about my accent. I'm worried about, not using the right word. And I say, no, there's the temptation in English is to be verbose and flowery and eloquent. And I still struggle with finding the right word. Simplicity is key. It doesn't mean dumbing down. It's all about distilling it to the message. And I think Einstein, if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough, which I really like. People have told me it has to be this length. No, it doesn't. You can distill it right down. So simplicity has to be key. And that's why I find it's better not having the slides. That's why I prefer, I'm going to show you my notes. This is exciting. So don't worry, I'm still here. Wouldn't that be great if I just went, oh, look over there, everyone, and I ran off. So this is my key. This is the whole of this session, right? Don't look into the future. Don't look at the stuff at the bottom. I'm joking. So that's it, because I know this well enough that one of those words will let me speak for a very long time. And I don't even have the timings on there. That's how rigorous I am with my own advice. Right. So then, stories. One of the questions I get asked is, how do you make a boring subject interesting? What if you haven't got something interesting to say? Stories. Always comes back to stories. Stories achieve so much. Right, direct question. Why are stories good for communication? Go. You can put it in the chats. You can say it out loud. I don't mind. Why are stories? And I mean good stories, but basically stories.
They have a beginning, middle, and an end.
Right, they have a satisfying structure that we're used to hearing. As a species, we are used to hearing stories. It's how we teach our kids. We read them stories last thing at night. Yeah, it's good. Having a structure where people can predict when the end's coming is really good. If you're ever stuck in that presentation and you go, right, and now it's slide 17, and you think, well, I've no idea, are we near the beginning, or is this or the one where they go, thank you very much, and you you don't realize what happened. Yeah, if the whole thing's a story, then there's a good structure. Yeah. Other reasons, I think, stories are memorable, excellent, universal appeal, memorable, Ian, excellent. Yeah, a good story is really memorable, and that's good for you, obviously, as a speaker, but excellent for your audience. Generally, I think people like to collect good stories to tell. I think it also humanizes data, and that's how I would argue make what someone thinks is a boring subject interesting. In my opinion, there are no boring subjects, but I think it's finding that angle. What's your perspective on this subject? What's your experience of it? If I have a freestyler talk, which I like to do now and again for laughs, I will go to my own experience. Here's what I remember. Here's the first time I ever experienced this thing. The story where everything goes wrong is always good. It's always funny. Even really upsetting days, and it's small consolation, but even upsetting days make hilarious stories in the future, right? So the story where things go wrong is wonderful. You may be familiar with The Hero's Journey. Joseph Campbell's amazing book, I think it was The Hero with a Thousand Faces, describes what he called the monomyth, this story archetype, and it's the hero character leaves their ordinary world, their ordinary mundane life. They travel with a mentor character to a dangerous special world where they land. I'm just cherry picking, that's much more complex than this. They encounter dangerous creatures, and they learn to fight with a sword, and they overcome ever-increasing challenges until they risk all, fighting the evil Dark Lord. They defeat them with the help of their new friends, and they return home victorious. Right, this is amazing story archetype, which is very appealing to us as a species. And there is a school of thought that says, we became the dominant species on the planet through communication and teamwork, but stories have to have been part of that. Now, I appreciate traveling to a distant land, learning mortal combat with a sword, and defeating the evil Dark Lord might not fit in particularly well into your story on a Tuesday about sales figures for Q3, but something about risk, something about relatable characters is really good. Here were these people, it might be you, it might be your team, it might be your clients. They were in a tricky position. Already, I'm invested, right? I want to know. I remember hearing a story from a company who do data backups, talking about some haulage company who were going to reset, and you could see it coming a mile off. They're going to reset their equipment, and they said, "Oh, should we do a backup?" And we said yes. They went, "Oh, it'll be all right. We'll reset it." And of course, they wiped everything, which I found really amusing, and that sort of raised a few questions. I thought it's other people's misfortune, right? It's always funny, which is why that story is, the story of your misfortune can be very funny. So a good story, it just grabs people, it engages them, it has them wanting to hear the next bit. And as I said before, should indicate a kind of structure so people have an idea of what is coming near the end. Right, let's talk a little bit about visuals, then I'm going to talk about the dark art delivery. So clearly I'm not using any visuals. However, you can see some stuff. You can see me, and you can see things. This is a real bookcase, by the way. Apparently, people have said to me, "Is that real? Or is that it's a real thing?" And there are toys here. And this is sort of a hangover from video games where you have toys on your desk and you can see various things. Now, I'm sending out signals with these, right? So clearly, if you know your stuff, you might recognize this particular thing, right? Well done, everyone. This is the best thing from the best film ever. And there are various other clues. This is very special. If you know what that is, top points. If you don't, it's fine. It's a spaceship from the 1980 TV show Buck Rogers. Now, I've pointed those out. I have read most of these books. I'm sending out some signals, and it might be, hey, I want you to think I'm intellectual, or if you notice, yeah, here's some comic books. And I often have a debate or an argument with people about the word professional, and by which I mean professional in inverted commas. What I see a lot is that people feel when they're communicating and it's a pressure situation of some sort and they want to impress, they become professional. And this seems to be a process of involuntarily leaving behind all the interesting stuff about them, leaving behind all their personality, no smiling. I mean, smart clothes are fine, that's good, but just sort of stiff and it's the facts and nothing at all, nothing relatable. And so I really hesitated doing this. My kids started putting, I think I put something there, my kids were adding more stuff and they'd move them around, which is really annoying. But I've realized that's sending out some signals. And if you don't like it, I'm sorry. But if you do, I'd like to think you would sort of light up for that. I'm a fan of sending out hooks. So I love comic books and superheroes and stuff that in this country traditionally for children and video games. I'm obsessed with the Dark Knight trilogy. I've come to realize it's taken a while that it's fine to talk about that and mention it. I'm also a parent, as I've dropped that in several times, and I love running and I'm losing my mind in lockdown. Hey, right. So it's all about points of connection. And I think if you can allude to that, and obviously I've referred to them directly, but if you can kind of refer to them casually, have them in there, that's sending out a signal. So for example, I know someone who's an architect based in Cambridge, lives in Ely, and he has a black holdall, sort of leather holdall thing, and it has a tiny silver cannon emblem on it, like a little metal cannon. Now, if you know what that is, you will know that it represents the popular football team, Arsenal. And his wife has said to him, "Don't put, for God's sake, why are you taking that bag to meetings?" And he said, "No, it starts conversations. Because if you don't know what it is, you go, even to reenactments, it doesn't matter. It sort of passes people by. But if you do know what it means, there's instant vitriol, love, or whatever, or a strong emotion, and they have a chat, they have a conversation. What if I'm a bad storyteller, never managed to deliver an effective punchline? Well, it may seem very facile, but I would say practice is the first thing. I know, so I have a friend who remembers jokes by the punchline. So says, "I'm going to tell you the whatever joke," and and then is bemused as to why no one laughs at the end. So you couldn't be worse than that. I think, I guess the punchline is, yes, it's that final bit. It's the callback, isn't it? It's the whole summing up. I'd say practice. I just think keep doing it, keep trying it out, and even better, record yourself and watch it back. So giving out those little moments, those little hooks, those little references, I think is really good. As I said, it can be tempting to think, well, I must be professional, but I think you can still be professional and be a human being and relatable. Right, so let's talk about the art of delivery and connecting with your audience. I've been doing various video content for a while, so I've got a load of videos on YouTube, and I looked back at some of the early ones recently, and I realized I came across quite restrained, and as I've gone along, it's been a long process, I've become more liberated and animated and just enjoying it more. And there's definitely a correlation between those two things. And I think there's something about giving yourself permission to have fun, to be a human being, that makes the engagement better. So what do you think makes a good first impression? You've appeared on the screen, or if it's in person, you've been announced, all eyes on you. But admittedly, in this format, it'll be just one person, right? Just trickling in. If you're doing a talk, what's the first thing you should do to make a good first impression? That is a direct question. Look at that. That's wonderful. Look at, yeah, eye contact, smile, look into the camera, smile, smile. Top of the class, everyone. 50 points to Gryffindor, just amazing, right? Incidentally, that's a broken point system, but we'll come back to that later. That's exactly it. It's amazing how many people think professional, don't smile. I also see a lot of this where there's people who've got 2 monitors and they're doing this, or even better, they're here for the whole thing. So why would you do that? Now I appreciate sometimes the lens is in a funny place on your laptop or on your machine, or you've got 2 monitors. But I would thoroughly recommend, I can't show you, but basically I've got, because I discovered whilst I love my laptop, the camera on it is absolutely dreadful. I bought a webcam and I've got it on a special mount. It's like an angle point lamp with the little mount for the camera, so I can put it wherever I want. So basically the camera is 2 feet in front of me, and then the laptop is a couple of feet behind that. So I'm looking directly at the lens. Now I'm looking at the screen, only a few degrees. I think that's really important for engagement. I think smile, look right into the lens as much as you can. I know someone who decided to get a big paper arrow and just stick it on their laptop, pointing at the lens, like just look at that. Or, you have a face and you cut one of the eyes out and you put it there, like the Terminator. Focus on the lens. When I do videos, I'll try and look directly at the lens the whole time, and it feels really weird. But when you watch it back, looks great, looks perfectly normal. So if you can have a setup where it's not, right under your chin looking up at you, and the lighting's good, it's well worth investing in. Smile, eye contact. This is me. This is what I'm going to talk about. However, if people are trickling in and it's an online thing, just chat. I'll ask people what they're watching on TV as a sort of vague link towards stories. But it's anything at all. I don't think it has to be formal. I don't think you have to wait until the talk starts proper before you start talking to people. Be chatting. I think it'd be quite inviting to hear a conversation going along, and then you join in. It's a bit like an exhibition stand. I've walked through exhibitions where there's business exhibitions and there's people waiting to talk to me. And I think, oh no, leave me alone, leave me alone. But if they're having a chat to someone, then I can sidle up and listen and get into it better that way. So what I would say in terms of delivery, that's the very first thing, is just a bit of energy at the beginning, show you're interested or make it look like you're interested. I think that very first moment, that good first impression, sets up what I call a positive feedback loop. So the audience trusts you because you look happy. Now, you may be terrified, but apparent confidence is a good, positive, benign trick that does that. It lets people think, lets their instinct think, okay, you seem happy, therefore, you've probably done this before, you probably know what you're talking about, this is probably going to be good. Someone has just come into the waiting room. I'm going to admit them, but quite frankly, I'm tempted not to anymore. I'm joking. So that very first moment sets up this nice loop. On the other hand, you could blow it with a simple bit of technical faffing about, not looking at the camera, looking as if you're unprepared, and almost telling the audience, oh, sorry, everyone, this is going badly. Immediately their instinct is they're just going to infer this isn't going to be any good. And you might have a great talk to give. So I would say, go in with that energy, look happy, and then the audience should like you and trust you, and then you can relax into it and be yourself. What's a great technique to engage an audience?
Ask questions.
There you go. I was doing it. I didn't want to be too but exactly. Direct questions, rhetorical questions, whatever. Keep people on their toes, right? Thankfully, I've just about got enough self-awareness. If I've been talking for more than 20 minutes, I think, yeah, I should probably stop and let someone else have at least a think about what's happening. So yeah, questions are good. Just getting some interaction. You're kind of checking that everything is working, that people are still on board. Now, what should you do if things go wrong? Sorry, that's rhetorical, right? Although you feel free to shout out if you want to, but if something untoward happens, so this could be someone asking you a difficult question, it could be a technical challenge of some sort. I think the very first thing you should do is smile and say, I have no idea if it's the difficult question. If something goes wrong, you've got the wrong notes, tell people, right? Particularly if it's obvious. Right, I've got this wrong. This isn't happening. This was supposed to happen. Oh, I've made a mistake. If you own it and smile, you're immediately telling the audience, because they're looking for emotional cues about how they should feel about this stuff. You're immediately saying, nothing to see here, move along, right? This is fine. I can handle it. I'm a problem solver. It's not a problem. If, however, you are literally telling them, sorry, this is a terrible thing that's happening. I've made a dreadful mistake. And you look really worried, that could really sabotage things. If you try freestyling an answer, so let's say it's gone really well, you've done a great talk, whatever it is, and someone asks you a difficult question and you've no idea, and you think, do you know what, I'm gonna have a stab at this because I think I know it, and you don't, you can imagine, I think your audience is gonna see through it, and credibility is gonna nosedive, even if you've done a great job up until that point. So I wouldn't ever improvise an answer. And if someone asks you, and maybe they're doing it because they want to see whether you know and they know the answer, then you can start a discussion and get them involved. And I think that can be a marvelous way of just getting some interaction. And it can be all about status. If someone's asking a tricky question, it's because they want to show off that they know the answer. Turn the lights on. Okay. Thanks, James. So when in an online meeting such as this, as I've said, I think this is the space within which you're operating. I think gesticulating and waving your hands around is great. I think that's a good thing to do. People have told me they've been told not to do that. I thoroughly recommend it. I think moving around and showing emotion is really important. If you're in person, then move around that room, right? Engage people that way. I think that's incredibly important. Engage them, find out what's going on, chat to people, interact. I would like to think that what I bring is responding to things as they happen. That's my, what I would call my special sauce. That's my thing. And so that is a great way of involving people and showing them that it's a live thing. That's why I was so pleased when I responded to that sneeze earlier on. It's just funny. If something goes wrong and it's obvious, it creates a kind of tension and people want to see how you're going to respond. It's like if you're an adult with kids, whatever the scenario, whether you're a teacher or it's your kid's party or whatever, they're looking to you to see how you handle a situation. So let's say I haven't ever been a teacher, but let's say I were a teacher and a new class has someone in it who says, oh, you don't have any hair, or why don't you have any hair? That's a test to see how I respond. Now, if I get annoyed with it or annoyed by that, that's a direct hit, right? They've scored, there's a weakness there, and then forever I'm whatever, Baldy Torrens, right? But, or Mr. Baldy, I don't know, again, stop improvising. If, however, I laugh and go, that's great, thank you for that. Anyone else? It's immediately saying it's not a problem. Certainly as a stand-up comic, people would say, oh, how do you deal with heckles? And the fact is, if someone has said something that's actually very funny and they've really got you, there's nothing you can do. And if you try to be funny and try to put them down, you're going to look like an idiot. Much better in any scenarios just to go with it. So if someone says something out, oh, sorry, Stella, did you just did the Dracula sneeze there? I applaud you for that. You did the perfect. That's very good. There's no one else in the whole house, but you made sure. That's very good. I remember being told about that way before COVID. If you're a speaker at a conference and you've got a microphone, for God's sake, if there's any sneezing to happen, I mean, they didn't call it the Dracula sneeze, but I've come up with that. And well done to you. That's good. I've derailed my train of thought again. That's good. Always make sure you're on it. Improvise. Oh, stand-up comic heckles. Yes. So if someone throws that challenge at you and you go with it and go, yeah, that's a good point. It's just funny because it punctures the tension. The heckle, the question, the challenge sets up a tension. And if you go with it, it's actually funny and you maintain credibility. So I know someone who was giving a talk at a software development massive conference. It was in person and he didn't really feel like he'd got them. Like the audience looked a bit bored. And then the battery on his laptop started dying. And so on this massive screen behind him was this low battery warning. Hilarious, right? They loved that. Haha, it's going wrong, right? Immediately, other people's misfortune, right? Always funny. And after that, they loved him because he was a real person. And he probably said, oh yeah, should have charged it up. And it can be as simple as describing what's happening, right? So let's say, one of my kids going, oh, here's, one of my children's coming and they didn't realize that I'm doing this talk, or here's my cat, or whatever. You're just talking about what's happening. It's just funny because you're showing people kind of behind the scenes, which is why I like getting my notes and showing them to you and don't look into the future. Oh, and incidentally, a little point there. If you do improvise something in the moment and it's funny, that's yours, right? Keep that, use it again. It doesn't matter if someone else sees you do the same thing again. I said that don't look into the future once and it got a laugh. And now I say it every time. Sorry to spoil it for you. I wasn't improvising, but those can be your moments. Here's a little thing. It's silly and you say it each time. I mean, the battle for the stand-up comic who, in theory is to look as if they're improvising every time. If you can make it look like you're improvising every time, that's great. There's nothing wrong with throwing in little extra bits. I was lucky enough to see Chris Hadfield, the Canadian astronaut, a few years ago, and he did this talk, and it was just incredible. And I was almost annoyed at how good he was. He had all these extra little bits and funny little stories, and of course, all his stories. This is a good point. I'm going to finish in a second, but all his stories, which is a great luxury, are all about technical issues that will result in possible death. That's it. So he's just got, oh, we saw this stuff leaking out the window. We probably need that. We're probably going to die. And then, they fix it. And it's all of his stories are like that. It's great. It's like, anyway, stories with absolute peril in it. But yeah, I saw him give this talk. I went to the sound check at this conference just to watch him. And he just got all these little bits and then he threw them in on the day itself. And it felt lovely. So that's it. Quick recap then. Find out about your audience. Make sure you've got everything that you need. Make sure you're familiar with the format. Say the words out loud. Write down some little bits on scraps of paper or cards or post-it notes. Move them around. Just get used to saying the talk, used to delivering it. Get used to the timing and the flow. You don't want to have to rush. It's a glorious, wonderful, joyful moment when you look at it and go, right, I'm 5 minutes from the end. I've got 5 minutes of material. I'm on track. And then you just end and it's lovely and you're not apologizing. Stories are good. Again, it's a phenomenal sound. I'm glad I haven't got headphones on. Good stories just grab people. Collect stories. Think of the stories that you've got. Your experience is interesting. Your perspective is unique and therefore interesting. Collect your stories. Recount stories. They work. And you can pitch other people's stories and tell those as well. But good stories really grab people. Consider if you need to show anything at all. Yes, if you've got an amazing bit of data that's a graph that communicates lots of information quickly, that's great, or a really good photo. I would recommend going through the rough version of your talk, first draft, and then see if you need any slides. If you don't, then that might be good. If you can get the idea into people's heads with words alone, then you've achieved something wonderful. But you might not need slides all the way through. And then finally, it's, engaging your audience. Preparation is key, I would say, with that. Knowing your material, knowing your stuff, knowing how long it's going to take, making sure you've got everything that you need, making sure you've got a whole pint of water, making sure that you're comfy, making sure the lighting is good, etc. If you haven't prepared correctly, it will show. It's that simple. And finally, yeah, I mean, commenting on things as they happen is fine, as long as you don't get too distracted like me, but improvising an answer to a tricky question would be a bad idea. So that is it. I hope that was useful. Thank you very much for listening.